Well, good afternoon. And on behalf of the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, I want to thank you for joining today's event on partnership models for increasing park access. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tavanga, where the UCLA campus sits and where I am joining you here from today. My name is Madeline Brozen, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Lewis Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our event today. We know that producing high-quality public spaces and parks, especially those that meet community needs, requires a thoughtful and curated cast of characters, and all of the speakers that are joining us today really fit that bill. For our program, we're going to hear two short presentations, and then we'll dive into a panel discussion. Feel free at any time to enter your questions for our speakers into the Q&A box, and we should have time at the end of our discussion to go through those. I'll be introducing our speakers as they present. And so our first speaker, Anastasia Loukaitou-Sideris, I want to invite you to go ahead and share your screen as I'll do your introduction. Professor Loukaitou-Sideris is a distinguished professor of urban planning at UCLA and the Associate Dean at the Luskin School of Public Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll give you the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our session. I think I will be speaking to the choir if I were to say that parks are very important assets for people who live in cities, for people of different ages, because they offer opportunities for socializing, for recreation, enjoyment of nature, getting involved in sports, and all these good things. Parks are particularly significant in underprivileged neighborhoods because that's where people live, typically in smaller multi-family units. Often they have no private open space, they have no backyards, and they have less resources to really utilize private private open spaces. And during the pandemic, which we're still living, unfortunately, but especially during the lockdown period, the importance of parks became critical as they provided urban residents the only possible opportunity to coexist with other residents in open air spaces while keeping some safe social distancing. The importance of this for people's psychological well-being should not be underestimated. We also know from myriads of studies that parks are particularly important for two age groups, children and older adults. They offer young children opportunities for exploration, for free play. They help them advance their physical, cognitive, and social development. For teenagers, they provide important settings for socializing with peers, and as well as getting involved in physical activity. And we know that particularly neighborhoods that provide easy access to parks, this translates to happier people because parks have good impacts for both the physical and mental health of people who visit them. There is even a study from Japan that found an association between longevity and living near parks and open spaces. But while parks and open spaces are important, the supply of parks faces a number of challenges. For one, Los Angeles has less park acreage per 1,000 residents than other West Coast cities like San Francisco, Portland, San Diego, or Seattle. Our metropolitan area has also an uneven allocation of parks and green open spaces, and in most cases, parkland is not adequate where it is needed the most, namely in the very dense urban areas with high concentrations of children, youth, and older adults. Even the Los Angeles County's park needs assessment showed that over half of the county population live further than half a mile away from parks and green spaces. Studies also find that certain groups, namely older adults, are much less visible in parks. They visit parks less often, not because they don't appreciate them, but because they face a series of challenges in accessing them. They sometimes feel unwelcome, feel unsafe there, or find the programs and activities that do not fit their needs. We also know that the cost of land has skyrocketed in Los Angeles, and with very few exceptions, finding and acquiring large expanses of land in central areas and converting them into parks is next to impossible. Now, this is the dark side of the provision of parks, but there is also a bright side. And in parallel to the aforementioned challenges, we also have witnessed some important opportunities. For one, California voters over and over again have shown that their support for parks and open spaces. For example, Measure A, approved by voters in November 2016, provides annually some important funding for parks, beaches, and urban greening. Second, there are now important nonprofit coalitions and important nonprofits which have emerged over the last decades with the explicit mission and goal of augmenting the counties and the city's parkland and developing, operating, or programming parks in various neighborhoods. And actually, one person on our panel is Tori's chair, who will give us more details about her very active nonprofit, the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, and their successful efforts of creating parks in park-poor neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Third, we have witnessed a raised understanding by public sector park and recreation departments about the need to improve equity in park space distribution, collaborate with non-public sector entities and community-based groups and institutions in park development. And I had the privilege in the past to collaborate and work with Sean Woods, who is also on our panel. And I hope he will give you more details about different innovative programs that he led. One of these programs was a program called Promotores that really helped bring more underrepresented folks to the Los Angeles State Historic Park. Lastly, we have seen advances in scholarship that give us some guidance on how to develop parks and open spaces which are flexible, multi-generational, meaning appealing to people of different ages, and also community-based. And we're also lucky to have two panelists with us, Louis Leiva and Miguel Velasquez, who have worked extensively with youth and older adults as part of community-based organizations in Westlake. And they can also share their insights about the needs of these groups for parks. So in the panel, we want to ponder about promising partnership models between the public sector, the nonprofit sector, and community-based institutions that can help increase public space and ensure that it's designed and programmed according to community needs. The recent opening, November 2019, of Golden Age Park in Westlake provides one promising partnership example of how a small space can possibly create a big impact of people of all ages. Two of the panelists represent, as I mentioned, institutions that are located very near the park, and they will be able to tell us how and their constituents interact in this park. Second, since we have typically little space and little money to develop parks, how can we make them most flexible and intergenerational? I hope that this is another question that the panel can discuss. A few words and some slides about the Golden Gate Park, which opened, as I mentioned, in November 2019, just before the pandemic hit. It is located on 739 South Coronado Street, very near the San Barnabas Senior Services Center in Westlake. It is designed to appeal to older adults. It is the first senior-friendly park in Los Angeles. And its design was informed by focus groups that were conducted with the help of the St. Barnabas Senior Services Centers that I had the opportunity with my research team to talk to these older adults. There were 5 focus groups with elders, 2 with staff, and 1 with their caregivers. And they talked about their needs. And these are the broad categories about that senior-friendly park elements should have. This led to the design of a guideline for creating parks for an aging population. You can access this for free on the Lewis Center website. The report is available online. And it has guidelines about how to achieve these elements of senior-friendly parks. There is another report that really tries to locate public land that can be made available for parks. And then this is matched with where we have the most needs in terms of older adults. This also can be downloaded for free. This pocket park, this is a picture from its development and its entrance. We have talked to a number of people using it, and they describe it as a little oasis in the middle of a very dense neighborhood. It has opportunities for passive recreation, for just sitting and reading, but also low impact exercise machines. There are even opportunities for some gardening. And these are some of, you see Mari, myself, this was just before the pandemic actually hit the park. And so we really see that the park can provide, we feel that this park can provide a model for more parks to be created, but we really would like to have this discussion about how this can happen, how it can be facilitated, how community groups can help, how can we bring people together. So I'm going to stop here and leave the opportunity for the panel to discuss some of these issues.
Great, thank you so much, Anastasia. I apologize for the background noise. The best plans of going to my workplace as a quiet place didn't necessarily work. We'll hopefully get that fixed before we launch into our discussion. But I want to invite Sean Woods to share his screen and have our next presentation. Sean is the Chief of Planning for LA County Parks and Recreation. And Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madeline. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Sean Woods, and as Madeline stated, I'm the Chief of Planning with LA County Parks, and I've only been with LA County Parks for about 1.5 years. The majority of my career was with California State Parks, where I led the community engagement efforts for the design and development of 3 new urban state parks and worked with Anastasia and Tori of a number of projects and programs. What I'd like to discuss today is give you a brief overview, now that I'm working with the county, of one of the county park's most consequential planning efforts to date. And the success of that project has largely been due to the fact that we have strong community partners that were involved with that process, including the Neighborhood Land Trust. Next slide. Okay, whoops, went too far. Sorry. Okay. So prior to 2016, the typical approach at county parks was that when funding became available for park development, it was divided by 5. The 5 supervisory districts were all given an equal share of the pie. And then in 2016, county parks embarked upon what is considered an unprecedented and groundbreaking planning effort known as the Countywide Park Needs Assessment to document the scope, scale, and location of park needs in cities and unincorporated counties throughout Los Angeles. The park needs assessment used various metrics such as park acreage per 1,000 residents, which is a pretty standard metric, park access, how many people live within a half mile of a park condition, what were the condition of the facilities, and then the park pressure, the population density around these parks to document park need across the county. And as you can see by this map illustrates park need throughout the county, with red indicating very high need and orange denoting high need. And South LA, San Fernando Valley, and East Los Angeles obviously are areas which have the highest park need communities. The park needs assessment is the department's North Star, and we use it to guide and prioritize almost all of our planning and development by applying, for the very first time in county's history, a needs assessment approach to resource allocation. And it has directly resulted in the county securing millions of state park bond dollars towards the development of parks and recreation in some of our most high need communities. In addition, the park needs assessment, as Anastasia referred to, was instrumental in the passage of County Measure A Park Bond, which now provides about $40 million per year in funding to eliminate park inequities in park poor, low-income Latino and Black neighborhoods. But because the park needs assessment focused so heavily on population density and walkability, county parks came to the realization that we needed to take a closer look at the rural and regional areas of the county, and not to develop a new study, but to incorporate this analysis into an update to the park needs assessment to gain a more nuanced understanding of the needs, as well as the opportunities in the rural and regional context. And so we're calling this current effort the Regional and Rural Edition. And so what we've set out to do here is, first of all, to create a comprehensive inventory analysis of regional parks and open space assets. And secondly, to create an examination of park needs in rural areas of LA County by applying the metrics that were established in the park needs assessment, but also adding additional metrics such as demographic information, race, ethnicity, health statistics, and age to our analysis. And what we're seeing right now, we're in the final stages of the analysis. At places like the Antelope Valley, in the initial park needs assessment, that map indicated that it was a green area, a low park area of need. But as you add health statistics and like foster care and all these other factors, you start to see these areas of vulnerability start to rise to the surface. So this study is really all about equity, and the ultimate purpose of the report is to collect the data and provide analysis that will further inform planning and decision-making to further ensure that our park resources are distributed more equitably throughout the county and provide the full range of benefits to all of our constituents, including rural communities. And what's most important, we hope that through this process, and we're at the tail end of it right now, that it will allow us to strengthen existing and develop new partnerships with other agencies and organizations, including tribal nations who are working towards similar objectives. And I'll talk a little bit, hopefully, about that later. And then in 2025, what we'll do is we'll take the park needs assessment with the rural and regional edition and combine it into one comprehensive study moving forward, just called the park needs assessment. So that's scheduled within 3 years. So these are the two study areas. The regional assets include regional parks, beaches and lakes, open space and natural areas and trails. And the 11 regional study areas align with the regional planning study areas and the general plan. And the rural areas are primarily unincorporated communities in Antelope Valley, the Santa Clarita Valley, and Santa Monica Mountains. These areas are characterized as rural by regional planning based on land use categories. You know, a lot of people think about LA as like sort of central urban core, but LA County is just huge and expansive, and the North County is a massive area. So for community engagement, we partnered with our consulting firm, MIG, and a lot of the members from MIG worked in the regional park needs assessment. And we have a list of as-needed consultants, which we pull upon to help assist with these planning efforts. And so they were really instrumental in the development of equitable and inclusive community engagement approaches and strategies that align with our current mission, vision, and purpose as a department. So who have we been reaching out to? So like the 2016 Park Needs Assessment, we were committed to a very extensive and inclusive community engagement process to ensure robust public input. And in recognition of the barriers related to language accessibility, we've also provided translation services to all of our surveys, which were printed in five languages, and we also prioritize multi-generational engagement. We reach out to residents, park trail users, underrepresented populations, trusted partners, and community leaders. And as I mentioned before, there was a specific focus on Native American tribal communities. And we work specifically with our community-based organizations, health-related groups, and of course, environmental organizations. And this was very challenging indeed to do all this virtually within the COVID context. So As I mentioned, we partner with a variety of community-based organizations. This is just a list of some of them, and to help with the outreach and engagement. Because we understand as a department, like sort of our limitations, that it's important to work with trusted organizations that can help us with boosting participation for virtual workshops and conducting in-person engagement at public events that these organizations would be hosting regardless of the effort. And they really serve an important purpose by sharing information, surveys on their own social media platforms. So community engagement in the time of COVID has been really challenging, but this is an example of one of our engagement tools, which we use, which is known as Maptionaire. One of the benefits of partnering with our on-call list of as-needed consultants is that they're continually dialed into the latest methods and techniques of data gathering. And so Maptionaire is a map-based survey tool that is multilingual and mobile-friendly, allowing respondents to complete a quick 10-minute survey on the go if you were at a bus stop or at a trailhead. And what it does is it applies the quantitative method to data gathering. An example above, the survey poses the question, what does recreation mean to you? And what this does is it provides us with a much more in-depth understanding of how people view and use parks and open space. And to date, we've received, I believe now, over 7,000 responses. So it has been a very effective supplemental tool to our engagement efforts. And so I'd like to finish by talking about Jackie Robinson Park, which is a park in the Antelope Valley, which I became very familiar with during this process. This is the first park in the nation named after baseball legend and civil rights icon Jackie Robinson, who actually attended the park's opening in 1965 in Sun Village. And Sun Village is a community that was established by a group of African Americans who were fleeing discriminatory housing practices or redlining in the urban core of the city during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they moved out to the Antelope Valley, and they established a self-sufficient community known as Sun Village. And the Women's Club of Sun Village, a collection of women, you can see the photograph on the top there with Jackie, they actually, through fundraising, through cake sales, and a variety of methods, they raised $3,000 to purchase the first piece of desert scrubland that became Jackie Robinson Park. And, you know, it's an extremely rich history that is largely forgotten by most Angelenos. And in fact, the park used to host the largest Juneteenth event in Los Angeles County with attendance exceeding over 5,000 people a year. So this year, County Parks, we were applying for the Proposition 68 statewide park project grant program through state parks for an expansion of Jackie Robinson. In preparation for that submission, we work with KDI, Konkui Design Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization that partners with underrepresented communities to advance equity and activate the unrealized potential in their communities. We held a series of community workshops and engagement sessions. And through those conversations, you know, I spoke personally with some of the elders who conveyed a strong sense of ownership and emotional connection to this park, which they see as a symbol of how far they have come as a community, an African-American community, even though the neighborhood is now transitioning to predominantly Latino. And so it was our belief as an organization that community engagement should not just be about this single project or program. It's really about establishing relationships with the community and trust with the people that we serve. And it should be ongoing and lasting. So given the competitive nature of the state parks grant program and the uncertainty of securing the funding for park expansion, we wanted to give back to the community something meaningful. So we were able to secure a substantial grant through Supervisor Barger's office, who is the supervisor for that area. And we're about to embark upon a project that will involve a series of community workshops and engagement sessions that will directly involve residents with the site's history and their narratives. And through a collaboration with KDI and Clock Shop, which is a nonprofit arts organization, and African-American artist April Banks, the workshops will lead to the design of permanent and commemorative installations throughout the current park. And the workshop series will culminate in a large-scale activation event during the reinvigorated annual Juneteenth celebration to be held at the park in 2023, when we're all meeting in person, hopefully. And then finally, I just wanted to put up the website. If you want to go and check out the park needs assessment or the rural and regional edition, all the information is there. The surveys are there. You can take a survey. We are in the final stages. The draft should be coming out in the next month or two, and then we'll go through an internal review process. And we probably will finalize the document sometime late spring, early summer. And that will be a substantial effort on our part to deal with some of the inequities we're seeing in the rural and regional areas of the county. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Sean. Hopefully I've relocated it in our suite a little bit and we're having a little less noise, background noise. So thank you very much. Before we kind of jump into our panel discussion, I do want to make sure that we recognize, the role of funding of all of this. I think Sean spoke to this. And so I just want to acknowledge the great support of the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, who's been a really great champion at UCLA and with Golden Age Park directly. And so thank you very much for that support. So I want to invite the rest of our speakers to turn on their camera so we can go into our discussion here. And first, I want to invite Tori Chair, who's the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. To kick off our discussion, Tori, can you share a little bit about your organization, especially in the context of Golden Age Park and other great models that you have? And how do you really think about kind of assembling some of these partnerships to make progress on park equity in the LA region?
Thanks, Madeline, and good afternoon, everyone. So the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust is a nonprofit park equity focused organization. We've been in business for about 20 years. This is our 20th anniversary this year. We engage communities and then kind of in the park planning and design process, and then basically kind of go all the way through the design process, the construction process. And then we also, because we are a land trust, operate and maintain parks and gardens. While we do this, we also advocate for funding that Anastasia and Sean and you have all mentioned is really key in making sure that we can continue to build parks in the highest need portions of LA County. We also advocate for policies that support park equity across the county. So Golden Age Park is a great example of our work. It is a park that is actually owned and operated by the LA Neighborhood Land Trust. And we manage the entire process of park development from acquisition to construction and design. And now we operate the park. We raised about $1.4 million of public and private funding from grants to help make sure that we could ultimately fulfill the community's priorities and construct the park. And those funds came from a whole range of different public funding sources and private foundations. And I think that that's a really important piece of this. Like the funding pieces just can't be emphasized enough. Through the process, we worked really closely with partners that are on this panel today, community residents, and as a number of other kind of public partners that aren't here, but that were really key in helping make sure we could pull the project across the finish line. Now that the park is open, and it's been open for about 2 years now, we operate the park using our kind of community stewardship model, which involves a community member who is a caretaker, a paid caretaker. They are a land trust staff member. They open and close the park. They're there twice a day. They pick up, they clean, they make sure that it's tidy, and they report any issues to our team promptly so we can make sure to address those. And finally, we've been waiting for the pandemic to get a little bit better to launch programming. We have some arts classes that are planned to start at the park this spring. We are waiting for the surge to be over, and then they will launch. So hopefully by March. And we are excited to continue to launch more programming through the rest of the year. To address the partnerships question, I would just say that really they're at the core of all of our work, and we can't build parks, we can't advocate for more funding or policies that support park equity without partners. And so every step of a project and the work we do really relies on collaboration. We work with kind of any range of different partners on any project. Public agencies are usually in the mix, so a city or the county or health department, kind of, it really depends, or a school district. We work with academics, just like UCLA, community-based organizations, private foundations, public funders, and community members. So the wide range of partners. And every step of Golden Age Park really was rooted in partnerships. So again, from the acquisition, which was the property was acquired through a Chapter 8 tax sale. So working with LA County on the acquisition, the fundraising with public and private funding partners, and then the planning and design with UCLA, St. Barnabas, Heart of LA, and many other partners. And I think that ultimately partnerships are a key to a successful project. And I would say on the park development side, they really ultimately make sure that the park reflects the community where it's located, and that the design of the park ultimately is a space that the community can really use and love and visit. On the advocacy side of the work, partnerships really also make the difference to make sure that the funding measures like Measure A, like Prop 68 that are both mentioned here, have the support they need to make it to a ballot and then get passed by voters. And many policies that we are focused on and to make sure that there is kind of equitable park access also need partners. They need everyone really pulling for them. So I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you, Tori. I mean, I think your comments really speak to the idea why we want to pull this panel together, because really, it takes a lot of people in terms of just even getting that small one parcel together, but also really as a coalition of people to make sure that this is not a one-off, that these types of models can come together for the future. So next, I want to introduce Miguel Velasquez. Miguel is the site director for St. Barnabas Senior Service Mid-City location. In the map that Anastasia showed at the beginning, St. Barnabas is located adjacent to MacArthur Park and also nearby Golden Age. So I want to ask you to start off by telling a little bit about your organization and especially the people at the Mid-City location. I do want to share that, in years of research of getting to work with St. Barnabas is a really special place. It is just a day center. It is not a residential facility, but it really provides a place for older adults of a variety of different backgrounds to come together and have a place where they feel kind of cared for and really kind of building that social cohesion. So, but in these last 18 months, well, now more than that, things have been very different at St. Barnabas because the doors have been closed to the public. So can you share a little bit about the organization, how you've been providing to your clients during the pandemic, and then why it was important for St. Barnabas to be involved with Golden Age and the value of the park to the people that you work with?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Miguel Velasquez. I am the site manager of St. Barnabas Mid-City location. I have been associated with the organization for 30 years. So I'm very familiar of all of this, what you're talking about, especially with the Golden Age Park. St. Barnabas Senior Services offer, a variety range of services for older population. Some to mention, like case management. We provide case management for people in need. And as you know, most of the people, the clients who live near St. Barnabas and our service area, they are low income, and they also need translations too as well and other services, just to, regular mail that they receive, form fill out, Section 8, application for Medi-Cal, Medicare, and all the services are provided by St. Barnabas. Also, we had the Family Caregiver Support Program. That program was newly opened like about a couple of years ago, and it's very, it had a good demand. This program provides services for care providers, 18 years and older, who are caring for an older adult relative or family member. Also, we have a transportation. Provides services for older adults who are 60 years and old as well. And then again, because of the pandemic, we have been limited to transport only 2 people, only one with the care provider and our vans, because as to prevent the spread of the COVID-19. Also, we have our nutrition department. Our nutrition department, it has been very successful, especially in the pandemic. We are providing an average of 400 meals per week for clients. We do one-time delivery for Mid-City, one-day delivery for Echo Park, and also for Hollywood as well. So it has been very successful. And the clients, even they homebound or they ambulatory, they don't have to come or coming to St. Barnabas to get the meals. That's another project that we're planning in the future, in the near future, but the pandemic actually is, set us back to point A, like you say, 18 months ago or so. Also, we have the evidence-based program and activities program. These programs, because of the pandemic, have been offered to our clients via audio calls. And one of the things that I need to mention too, most of our clients, they are low income. So they can afford to buy a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop, computer. So how we connect with them, the social connections are being done by audio calls. So we have this platform called Uber that basically the client who receives the advice, for the next topic to be connected in the audio call, receive a text message. And then the person just click press one, and is connected to multiple activities during the particular day and time. Also, we have the newsletter. The newsletter is coming up monthly, and that has been a very good tool to keep those clients informed to as well with different articles, like COVID articles, stones of the month, very popular flower of the particular month, and all the holidays and things like that. So it has been very grateful. Also, we have the technology program. That program is going to launch actually probably a couple of weeks now, but it will provide training for older adults and how they can use an iPad and other technological devices. So with that, that's St. Barnabas, services that we provide. Now, as you know, St. Barnabas is located in the heart of, by MacArthur Park. So we are our clients are basically very familiar with the three parks, MacArthur Park, which is the larger, which is under refurbishing right now. We also have the Lafayette Park, that's another park nearby. But the Golden Age Park, that's the newly, I would say like the youngest park that we have in our community. So when we have been having this study, especially with UCLA, and also when the clients report to us, about this park, the Golden Age Park, we have been having a good, I would say, feedback. Number one, for example, it's a smaller park, and compared to MacArthur and Lafayette Park, so they feel private. They feel that the privacy they can share and they can read a book, they can go and talk to friends right there. It's fenced, so it's closed at the end of the day, so it's secure. Nobody has been reporting going to the park after, let's say, when it's dark, just for safety issues. At the same time, they have been reporting like they can go for lunch there, they can go for lunch, they can have friends for activities, like playing cards and things like that. One of the good things that attracted attention, just I would say late last year, it was they have a group of seniors who were carrying pots, like plastic pots to the park, and the little there, so they were trying to plant something to take home. But the activity was associated to go out from their homes and go to the park. So the park is actually giving them a new way to socialize, always with the social distance and all of that. But it's very, very good. The older adults can be very creative. So St. Barnabas, now that, with the pandemic set us back, to where we started. So now the planning that we have, hopefully that this pandemic is going to pass soon, we hope, is now. We can also use the park, Golden Age Park, to have Tai Chi classes. We can also have our birthday parties, for older adults to be celebrated there, and also other activities too, like just to take a walk to the park, just to go have lunch, all these things. But the main point is to prevent our older adults to be isolated. Because sometimes when they inside these buildings nearby, when they open the window, they just can see the other wall of the other building. So they feel trapped in there. So having the Golden Age Park in place near them, it has been very, I would say, attractive to them. And they receive and welcome the park, with their whole heart. So we're gonna be talking about this, I guess, in the future and giving all of you a feedback about the park and how our seniors and older adults, I'm sorry, are gonna be involved, and also the staff of St. Barnabas, and how we're gonna be involved to provide more activities and normal times coming soon. So with that, I think I'm done with this for right now. Does anybody have any questions? Please let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Yeah, I mean, it's a real joy to hear how Golden Age Park has really kind of effectively been, an extension of St. Barnabas and really making sure that people come together. So our last speaker is Louis Leyva. Louis I know he's working at UCLA City Lab as the Assistant Director of Community Design Research, but that's a bit recent. And so previously you were involved with Golden Age with Ola. And so you share a little bit about that organization and your involvement in the park.
Thank you so much. It's really a joy to be in community with you all, sharing virtual space, talking parks, and really thinking about the ways in which young people are able to find places to be where they feel safe, stimulated in a variety of capacities. So again, I'm making my speaking debut with City Lab, but I'm transitioning in from having been working at Ola for about 2 years, specifically in the visual arts department. Ola was part of the larger coalition that was engaged by the Land Trust in thinking about the design elements and really the outreach components that were going to be put into Golden Age's big debut. One of the immediate ways in which Ola, specifically the young people in the arts department, were able to impact the space were through a series of ceramic tiles that are actually placed on the park's exterior. So it was really interesting, again, when you think about conventional drawing and a lot of kids that are really excited to take things home, how this particular art piece was currently is existing in the public realm and will have a life longer than what they had initially thought about that. Really thinking about the active ways in which parks as a whole have been integral to Ola's history. Ola has over 30 years of being active in the Westlake MacArthur Park neighborhood and actually got its start at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. This immediate area along Wilshire Boulevard really lacks green space, and depending on who you have tell the origin story, it really was the founder,
Oh, Louis, I think we lost your audio there for a moment. Nope. Oh no. Let's see. No, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there.
Sorry about that. I think my AirPods might have anyhow, I was talking about the Ola's origin story, and again, the basketball being as a way to bring young people together. Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, a place that doesn't really have a lot of green space, but they had a rooftop basketball court, right? So thinking about the move a lot further down Wilshire, right now they have a vicinity in Lafayette Park, so really being able to expand the ways in which people play and create, but also thinking about how COVID called for the shift really to doing outdoor programming, right? So the plethora of Ola's programs that included academic, athletic, or artistic creation really found a life in outdoor spaces, right? And also one of the beautiful things that we were able to do in this time was introduce our students to Golden Age Park, because it's one of those things that kind of happened and then COVID overshadowed a lot of it, right? So really thinking about the ways in which this beautiful space was just blocks away from where we congregate on a regular basis, but was invisible to the kids, right? So being able to introduce them and to see how happy and receptive they were to being able to play here was really one of the highlights as I transitioned out of this org. With that, I also wanted to, again, really highlight my colleague Cecilia, who was integral in participating in a series of studies and workshops with, in conjunction with St. Barnabas, and really taking into account the intergenerational approach, which is really important. A lot of the students that we work with, similar on the flip end, but paralleling to the elders, are low income, first-gen Americans, and really thinking about how that lived experience, or a family of 5 in a 1-bedroom apartment and not necessarily always having a space for yourself, a space for privacy, a space to play. The parks really being a major asset, and really more so in thinking about how the lockdown period really affected young people all people across ages really, but specifically the young kids, talking about how, being confined to walls in an indoor space really affected their happiness, and, really being able to find joy in being able to go outside, right? So yeah, thank you. I'll wrap it up for now here.
Great. I mean, I think I also kind of want to highlight, those tiles that you talked about. They're a really good way to keep people engaged with the idea of the park while it was under construction. I think that there's really, the land trust is like a great idea of, you get people really excited about this thing, but then it kind of undergoes a long fallow period. So how do you make sure you kind of keep up that energy? And I know those tiles, and then getting to see those tiles really on the park is just, it was just a real stroke of genius there. So, returning to our group, but kind of as we heard in everyone's remarks, there's positive impacts on a lot of different groups of people. We know spatially kind of where there's a lot of park deficits, and sadly it's in too many parts of LA. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of different groups of people, and from each of your perspective, what type of groups do you think that LA needs to do a better job in terms of serving at parks and open spaces, whether this is in design or programming or outreach? We'll kind of go in reverse order that we've gone.
Why don't you direct the question to someone that starts? Because everybody's expecting or waiting for the other to start. So Mari, why don't you ask anyone?
Yeah, I think we'll have Louis start this one.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And again, this topic is something that I've been actively thinking about. Parks really as places of inclusion, but also thinking about historical and traditional exclusion to spaces. A lot of, what I think about in terms of like barriers to general access. If anything, the pandemic has really showed us that, just by looking at someone, you really can't make assumptions about their health or their physical capabilities, right? So really, how are we actively engaging folks that are disabled, steering away from, just thinking about, is this ADA compliant, but really, how are we actively involving folks in play that might be in wheelchairs, that might be in crutches? Having grown up in Los Angeles, I really think of Griffith Park in particular as one of the places that does it right, and also recognizing that it's at a larger scale and has a wide variety of natural and infrastructural assets that are very different. But one of the things that I actively remember, in my childhood was the playground, Shane's inspiration, that was specifically modeled to incorporate younger children that are disabled. So again, being able to have flat park ground to be able to push a wheelchair or a stroller, things of that capacity, I think is something that is really important. Again, thinking about the ways in which people are actively or passively participating in a space, but really to the play component. And then also with that, I also want to add in thinking about planning and gender. I really love the ways in which Sean integrated KDI and their historical work in his presentation. They also helped develop a handbook for gender inclusive planning, just short of maybe about 2 years ago now, and really thinking about the ways in which women, gender nonconforming people maneuver space. That's also something that I recognize, as a man person, but also when we're collecting testimonials from our students and those that identify as young women, young ladies, and, hearing about, their discomfort and recognizing that their bodies are developing and changing, but also having to move from one space to another and recognizing that they're being harassed verbally, catcalled, things of that sort. We're talking parks, but an integral point of reference for me is Tatiana Faisal-Alizade's Stop Telling Women to Smile, which was a street project that really looked at harassment and turned around the question of what would you say to your harasser if you had the opportunity to, right? So really, again, bringing back these messages and thinking about what public space would exist like, free of gender-based violence and harassment, and really also, again, on the gender component, mothers, right? At Ola, a lot of the mothers are passively waiting in the park to pick up their students while they're at their music class or at their art class, but also recognizing that a lot of the elements or the ways in which I see the park activated, it's primarily male dominated when you think about like the soccer field or a lot of some of the other activities that are going on. So really, again, how are we thinking about gender differences and the ways in which people utilize or maneuver space, questions about safety, questions about comfort as well. Those are some of the things that I think about when I ponder on this question and what does it physically look like. I think that that's something that we're all continuing to imagine, and there are a wide array of insights that can be added by my colleagues here.
Yeah, Tori, I think that's, I mean, sadly, there are too many groups that are underserved. I think that's what we can take away from your remarks. Tori, what are some other groups that you all try to kind of make sure that are really targeted in some of your projects?
I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, but to sum it up, I think that really across the board, what we see when we work in low-income communities of color around Los Angeles is that many people are not typically engaged in a planning process or feel a great sense of distrust in participating in a planning process, because when they have participated, it hasn't gone well, or maybe they don't actually see the results of kind of their participation. And so a lot of what we do, I think, is really trying to make sure that we are reaching kind of a broad cross-section of the population by really kind of going directly to communities and setting up engagement in a way that's very accessible, hands-on, easy to access, breaking down access in terms of language and, making sure that things are, there's pictures, there's text, there's a combination. So I think that's one piece of this, is that really we kind of, we could see teens, we could see older adults, we could even see younger children that maybe don't typically get to participate. But I think across the board, many folks are really excluded from these processes. And then what we see is, even in the early days of the pandemic, when the beaches were closed and parks were closed, and people who don't have yards, they weren't, there's no space for folks. And so, and even maybe if the beach becomes the only place, the signage isn't in a language or in a format that people can understand, you have to pay for parking. And so I think that across the board, we see a lot of ways that people are excluded from planning and then even access. And so I think that's our goal through these partnerships and through kind of deep, kind of thoughtful engagement, to make sure that we're really including people every step of the way, from early engagement all the way through implementation.
Yeah, I think that'll tee up well to kind of, Sean, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of in terms of these underserved groups, as some of the tribal communities that you all are working with. And you're muted. Oh, Sean, if you could unmute.
I just wanted to also just underscore what Louis and Tori was saying, with those particular underrepresented groups, that what the park needs assessment set out to accomplish was to establish the fact that parks are critical social infrastructure. So a lot of these communities are frontline communities that, underserved park poor communities in the urban core, who are first to see the impacts of climate change, these heat events, and, these places that don't lack open space or shade cover. Shade equity has now become a very popular term to describe places that have lack of trees. So yeah, there's just so much need to go around, but I wanted to talk about our recent engagement with Native American communities, particularly how it aligns with the park needs assessment planning effort. Last year, the LA County Board of Supervisors launched an historic Indigenous Peoples Day motion. And the purpose of that was to address historic barriers to Native American tribes and urban Indian communities to county lands to perform traditional cultural and religious practices, as well as to improve the county's overall relationship with tribal nations and Indigenous residents. I think most people don't realize that LA County is home to the largest population of American Indian and Alaskan Native people of any county in the US. And I think the latest census data, it's at 220,000 people, representing over 200 tribal nations. And this reflects both local tribal population and the disruptive effects of federal Indian policies that dislocated many people throughout the nation. So this happened at the same time as our planning efforts. So we did a very focused, intentional outreach to Native American tribes and groups, and worked closely with Native American community-based organizations. First and foremost, we developed a survey that was more responsive to tribal interests and the potential use of public lands. And this engagement, we believe, is going to lay the foundation for a further effective and productive partnership with tribal communities, and the potential in the future for co-management of public lands as a future strategy. And one of the things that also happened this year, which very proud of being a part of is the County Board of Supervisors granted LA County Parks the authority to execute agreements with Native American tribes to conduct reburial of Native American human remains and cultural artifacts that have been excavated and disturbed during public and private development. And so I don't think it should come as any surprise that many of our county parks are located within ancestral territories of local tribes. And so we've actually entered into our very first reinterment agreement with the Tatavian and San Manuel Band of Indians on county park lands. And this is really part of our mission to advance social equity for Native American people whose ancestral burial grounds have been taken and desecrated. And so we believe that this reinterment effort will really assist Native Americans in honoring their ancestors and respects their right to continued and future spiritual practices on public lands. So that's a project in process right now. One of the things that I've learned is that many of us, when we deal with Native American tribes, it's basic through this AB 52 consultation process. So it's very regulatory, but there's no cultural literacy around communication. Like, how do you talk to sovereign nations with respect and dignity, and what's the language you use around those sort of discussions? And so we've really tripped up on a lot of that in the very early stages. And what we've come to realize, part of the recommendations is that all county employees need to go through a training process, really to understand. So what, sort of, the sort of genocide that took place and all these historic injustices and how this sort of feeds into this sort of narrative, and coming to the table with that understanding is very, very going to be very important moving forward.
Great, thank you, Sean. That's really inspiring work, and glad to see that your department's really given a variety of tools to be able to implement that. Anastasia, do you have any other kind of these underserved groups? I think we've talked through a lot of the ones, but anything you want to add to this question?
I really want to add one thing, and I probably am kind of moving forward because you've asked us to say what would inspire us. But for me, I would be inspired if we could have a park that each community has a park that considers its own living room, that they feel safe and they can coexist, and especially in underprivileged communities. And one aspect, which is very important, that all of our panelists talked about, especially for underprivileged groups, is, how do you give options and choices to people to do what they want? A second aspect is, especially because we lack space in very dense communities, is how do you have people interact? How do you create intergenerational spaces where they would be liked by people of different ages, different races, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations? What is the common denominator? And how do you reach these spaces? I think Tori talked about the process, which is extremely important to bring people to talk about what they want to see. Another thing has to do with design. How do you create these spaces? And the third thing has to do with programming and activities. Music, art can bring people of different ages together. And by the way, I'm opening a parenthesis. We hope to have in February a Golden Age Park with the support of the Gilbert Foundation, a kind of a community event that will have a band from local kids in the community, and will be people from St. Barnabas will be invited, and there's going to be a community theater. And what would inspire me really is that if we have these little parks in each and every community, especially in the inner city, and we find ways to bring people together. Because if you think about that, we live in very siloed communities. We don't interact with one another. We are within our own occupational group, age group, race, ethnicity group sometimes. And public spaces are the only parts of the city, well, one of the few, I should say, parts of the city that have the potential of bringing people together. But unless we include the people in the process, we include the people in the design and in the programming, we're not going to have this intergenerational space. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think that, so yes, just want to reiterate that we hope to invite everyone here that's in this virtual space to be in a community as long as, as we're safe or so in a month to do so, to really be in conversation. Now the hammering has literally moved outside of the door I have moved to, so please excuse that noise. But yeah, I think that you're really kind of amazed. You'll be amazed if you go to Golden Age of how many different people can really feel comfortable in this space. So, Miguel, I want to offer a question to you, because I know that at St. Barnabas, you're working with communities that speak a lot of different languages. And really making sure that everyone understands the process, and really that language barriers aren't a further thing that really dissuades people from participating. So could you tell us a little bit about how you all at St. Barnabas address language barriers, especially when it comes to connecting with services or park programming, and how you think that all kind of makes a difference?
Thank you. Yeah, I think in part what we're doing at St. Barnabas too, we are carefully having the stuff that we need, linguistically speaking. For example, most of the clients, the participants that we have are, I would say, besides English speakers, are Korean speakers, Spanish speakers, and also that's the majority. So we have to have the staff associated with this, particular clientele, so we can give the proper communication to them. And I think going back with the parks, this is very important in terms of, I will say, to promote. Let's say for the Golden Age Park, for example, we were able to pass the communication among the languages that I mentioned: Spanish, Korean, English. So it was very successful. I just want to add one thing too. Since most of the people that we have in our area, Pico Union area, and where the Golden Age Park is, they're immigrants too. So they coming from from even remote towns in their own native countries. And sometimes the idea of the park that they have is only a green area with grass and trees. That's the idea. But a park, it is important to have amenities too as well. Like I noticed right now, they have some parks that have a community center, right? They have community center. People can go there and have the special, even gym, an outside gym. So all of this is very attractive. So I think the more we talk about these ideas, the best we can plan in something. But yeah, a way of communication is very important, and to satisfy, whoever is going to be hearing this topic or subject and communication.
Great, thank you. So you kind of Miguel, you just talked about amenities. We know that, on top of the physical design and the process, it's really about programming, right? Like the part of, people, really want something to do or something to engage with. So Louis, I'm curious a bit about, what at OLA, kind of some of the different programming that you all have thought about at, at Golden Age or other parks, and how you feel like that has been successful and kind of led to bringing people into the park.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I appreciate your asking it. And again, the outdoor spaces are really key to OLA's successful programming, especially now, again, in pandemic, really thinking about having the room to be able to do what you want to do without the fear of getting sick. But our outdoor painting and photography classes proved to be really successful. And again, similarly building on when it is safe to return, Golden Age Park being definitely a place that was very well received by the kids when they were introduced to it. And I actively remember, bringing them for the first time and thoughts of like, I want to return with my grandma. I want to return with my little brother. And really, I think one of the things that OLA is really great about is having our staff present with the students and thinking intentionally about like, what is it that you're going to do when you're here? Not necessarily that you need to have a plan or agenda, but again, when you are seeking a place with a purpose, it's always really interesting to see what comes out of that. The intergenerational orchestra is one of the newest programs to have been introduced at OLA, and really, I know that Anastasia hinted at the community event, and that's also one of the things that we were sad got postponed, but a spoiler alert, they're going to be making a musical debut performance at the Golden Age Park whenever it is that we are able to, convene, but also really thinking about artistic creation and the thoughtfulness that was put into the park design. The plants are one of the things that, and flowers were one of the things that the kids really liked photographing. So I actually had the great fortune of being at the park when it had its debut, and one of our teachers had created a coloring book that referenced the plants that were already present in the park. So it was a scavenger hunt type activity where the kids were asked to look for the particular flower, and then at the end they were given a plant. But again, really thinking about the natural ecology and what it means, again, to coexist amongst other people, but also the natural elements that were put into that. I think Ola does a really great job of integrating events that really focus on the youth, but are applicable to people of different age ranges. And it's really nice to see the creativity that comes from them. And also, again, when you are able to establish trust as an organization, but also as an individual, the kids will tell you what they want and when they're happy or unhappy. So really being open and receptive to the feedback as well. With that, I'm just going to drop a link to the Tumblr page for their photography. The teacher was Yoon Kim, Yoon Sol, I'm sorry. And most of it was focused on Lafayette Park. These pictures were taken about 2 years ago, but I know again that Golden Age is definitely an area of interest, and hopefully some beautiful art will continue to come out of that place.
Tori and Sean, do you want to offer any thoughts on kind of the programming models or things that have worked well in your efforts?
Sure. The LA Neighborhood Land Trust, as a land trust and as a park operator, the programming is actually a key kind of element for our work. And I think the programming combined with the caretakers that are opening and closing the park twice a day helps to make sure that the parks are really activated and feel safe, comfortable, and kind of encourages use. And so the programming, I think, like both Louis and Miguel have mentioned, I think is really about kind of following the interests of community members and the participants. And so we have done everything from cake decorating to knitting to English as a second language to Zumba and art. And so that's really kind of what we strive to kind of implement our projects and programs that are really kind of appealing to community residents. We are going to start with an art class at Golden Age. That's going to be our first kickoff, just because art is typically a very popular class. And once we kind of have a base of participants, we'll start to expand. But we figure that's a good way to kind of enter back in after a long break from COVID.
And I'll just add to that. One of the things I regret moving to the county is that now I'm in planning and sitting in an office and not in the park and not, working in the operations and programming. But I am very aware of a lot of the efforts the county has taken. And, everything here is equity focused. During the pandemic, we did see a huge increase in visitation to our parks, over 300% increase to trails. And a lot of people, first-time people from areas, as Anastasia referred to, who are maybe living in apartment buildings or other places that don't have green space and weren't able to escape the stay-at-home orders or the sort of restrictions of the pandemic. And so we started out by providing virtual recreation programs on our online. We had Zumba classes, art classes, the like, and there was like a high visitation to those programs. It was incredible. We have a program called Parks After Dark, which was to activate parks, really looking at times where, teenagers can kind of get into trouble, right? So like if you activate spaces and provide, programming, that offers a legitimate venue to, expend energy. So we have a program called Parks After Dark. With the pandemic, we called it Parks After Dark in Motion. So we made it mobile with bicycles and strollers and things of the like. Another thing that is really important to us is the workforce pipeline. It's not just about providing a recreational space, but most people don't know that LA County is the largest provider of youth employment, particularly focused on low-income communities of color. So we have a whole host of programs, and we just started this program called lifeguard training. It's a lifeguard training program to specifically focus on the African-American community, where you're having high drowning rates in places where people aren't getting the training, and then they'll go out to the ocean and they're not accustomed to the surf or whatever. So making sure that we're getting people training like in life skills, but also providing this sort of employment pipeline to get them into the system. Because, what I learned at state parks, and we had a tough road in that respect because of the civil service exam process, is that when people come to parks, they want to see people look like themselves. They want people that represents the demographic of this diverse and wonderful city and state. And a lot of government agencies are not there yet, that there isn't really sort of an imbalance in terms of the people who are delivering the programs, the people who are coming to the programs. So that's a real challenge for us. And I applaud Louis and his organization and Tori, you know, and I think that a lot of people are doing great work out there. And so, you know, we really just are standing on the shoulders of the grassroots organizations. The nonprofits are doing the great work and providing really, in many cases, just the real estate, the space to allow for these programs to exist. And, you know, there's so much more we could be doing. So that's just a tidbit of what I know.
Well, that kind of tees up our first audience question pretty well. So Ora is asking about, you know, another potential partnership with public schools and LAUSD in particular. So I'm going to send this one to Tori, and maybe Sean kind of wants to jump on as I'll loop another question. But Ora asks, can you talk about work to open school playgrounds as community parks, and really hoping to make a citywide policy? And then there was another question about legal mechanisms to kind of, you know, bring together some of these partnerships. And I'm thinking, Tori, you might kind of be able to answer a couple of those questions together here.
Sure, yeah. I'll start with the legal mechanism question because it's a pretty quick one, which is for Golden Age Park, the land trust purchased the property. So we own the property, we pay property taxes on it, we pay for all of the maintenance costs. It's our park. But we do have lease agreements with the city and other public agencies for lots that we, you know, that have a park on them that we operate. So I'd be happy to talk offline if there's more questions on that and if we have time at the end. In terms of schools, that's a whole panel in itself. I think there's a lot to talk about there, but I would say that the Land Trust believes that for many communities, opening schoolyards to communities is really the only way that we are going to achieve park equity. So it's actually one of our core kind of advocacy areas at the moment. We are part of a coalition of kind of a number of 10 plus organizations that are all working to develop some policies, and we'll be kind of working to kind of support LAUSD and finding ways to get campuses easily open to communities. So it's not just communities who have the resources and the willpower and the time to figure out how to open their campus, but everyone across the city, especially in communities like the Pico Union and Westlake MacArthur Park, can have open spaces to learn how to ride bikes and play basketball and just get outside of their house. And Auda, I know you're Ready to Help is working on opening a campus in Mid-City, and ultimately we believe that it's going to take everyone. So this isn't just an initiative the Land Trust is working on, it's really communities across the city organizing. And I'm going to stop there just so there's time for other folks. Thank you.
I'll just quickly add to that. You know, I mean, the county is very adept at these joint use agreements with schools to utilize their fields during times of inactivity. And before I came, there used to be some sort of loose agreement where we would allow people to come and utilize schools to come and utilize our space for soccer events or whatever. And we live in a litigious society, and there was a lawsuit, of course, and because, you know, we didn't cover all of our bases. And so now we have this really onerous process where you have to go through this memorandum of agreement. You have to provide all the insurances required so that like we're insulated from any sort of potential legal liability. But we're working through that process, and, you know, we're determined to, like, as Tori said, you know, I mean, somebody asked a question, what are some of the innovative ways to find park space in low park concentration areas? There isn't much land available. So we have legal agreements with like Edison to utilize utility corridors for parks. We're building a park right now in 92nd Street Park, which is going to be a huge linear park along a huge right of way. And it's going to have, you know, the towers in the middle. But this is what's available. This is what's left in Los Angeles because of our lack of park planning over the last 100 years. We're working with Caltrans on these like little remnant spaces along the freeway. It's not ideal, but in unincorporated areas like Florence Firestone, there is no park space available. So we're really trying to really dig down and be innovative. We're working with libraries to look at spaces outside of the library to create little pocket parks. We did one at Woodcrest Library, which is won design awards. And these are like less than a quarter of an acre. And, Miguel referred to this, park could be just like trees and grass, but it's also a place for social gathering and just to create a place to create community social cohesion, which is really important to us. And that can manifest itself in many forms. So, yeah, I mean, Tori's right. We can have a whole panel discussion on this particular topic.
Can I ask something? Can I ask something? I follow up on, and mostly on Sean, but also Tori. So we all agree that Golden Age Park is a wonderful model. Why don't we have more of those? Or rather, what would it take to have more of those smaller, less than a third of an acre parks? Is it a matter of resources? And I think Tori referred to how long it took to cobble together the different resources to get the park. Is it a matter of space? I mean, there are a lot of empty lots, private lots, admittedly, especially in inner city area. Some of them are empty fenced parking lots that could be converted into parks. Someone owns them, somewhere the resources need to be found to buy them. But it seems that this might be a model, but we don't see this model happening at a great extent. And so I guess my question to both of you is, what are the big challenges? How can they be overcome?
Well,
Tori, I don't know if you want to talk about like Wishing Tree or these residential lots, that we're working with your organization. I mean, this is a great example.
It is a great, Wishing Tree is a great example. I would say, really, I think that finding a property that is available is the first challenge. And you see a lot of vacant lots. Oftentimes they are not available. There's a private landowner who has no interest in selling the property. They're holding on to it to make millions at some point down the road. There's also lots that are brownfield. So they're a former gas station, or in the case of Wishing Tree Park that Sean was mentioning, it's an 8.5 acre park that we are almost done building in unincorporated West Carson that sat vacant for decades because it had such a toxic history. No one would touch it. People were afraid of the liability of taking on a property like that. So it took a nonprofit that was able to form a separate LLC to take and hold that property and ultimately transform it into a park. I think that in a dream world, we find all of these vacant lots and we transform them into parks, but we ultimately need to get possession. If we have a downturn in the economy, that is a great time to get some of these properties, because then we have property owners that are more willing to sell, but right now they're not. I'll stop there, Sean, so you can add in.
Yeah, not much more to add. I think the will is there. It's the way, and funding is critical to that. The Measure A generates about 40 million a year for park development and facilities upgrades. And, we've calculated the need right now in the unincorporated areas of the county at $1 billion. So do the math at 40 million a year. How long is it going to take us to get to that? But we're looking at funding opportunities wherever they exist. In the last 3 years alone, we've secured over $91 million in grants at the state level to implement parks, and particularly solely focused on very high and high need communities. So we're looking at these residential lots. We have people within the real estate division that are just scanning MLS listings to look for residential lots that are up for sale. Is there a willing seller there? Are they willing to sell at a reasonable fair market value? Because we have to purchase the lot at fair market value. I think that the real estate market has really kind of gone out of whack, and it's really made things very difficult. And 20 years ago, when I started doing this work, people thought you build a park and that's great. They didn't think about like, oh, you're going to gentrify the neighborhood because you just increased property values. And the people who fought for the park there originally then get displaced. And now we're talking about equitable development, like the 11th Street Bridge Project in Washington, D.C., where they go in years and years ahead of time and establish, a framework for the community that exists there, homeowners loans to get them to buy property and set up, banking accounts and all these sort of things. I mean, that's the stuff, a legwork that has to be done ahead of time to make sure you're not also creating a displacement model at the same time. So yeah, the funding is, for me, is the biggest challenge, and the lack of available open space or opportunities.
Well, as we're kind of wrapping up to our time here, want to kind of just highlight a few themes, then we'll kick off to our last question. But I think kind of what we learned today was that, it really takes a whole community of different partners. We heard a number of them today and discussed others really that are culturally competent and trained on the diverse needs of the communities that they're serving, that people are engaged in the process, and that, really engagement through the park opening and then really programming once it opens, is that it takes so much intention all along the way. And I really just want to thank all of the organizations and speakers represented here. So as kind of a way to end and inspire our participants to stay involved, or especially for the students who may want to kind of dedicate their professional careers to this space, I kind of want to ask a final question of what inspires you all to kind of stay involved in this work? And we'll start with Miguel. We'll go Miguel, Louis, Tori, Sean, Anastasia to close out.
Well, that's a very good question, and I got a very good answer for that. Yeah, I think what is inspiring to, and I noticed this because I've been doing social services too as well, working directly with the people. Every time that's when you see somebody smiling and you see somebody happy, regardless of emotional pain or physical pain, when you see something like that, it is very rewarding, when you feel like that. Now, as we talking about this, I'm already picturing myself how the future could be to see the many people smiling. So that's very rewarding, and I think that's very inspirational. And another thing too, I don't know, most of the background of people, but for example, myself, I used to work in business, like hardware, like smaller, like Home Depot, very small, but it was business. I never thought in my mind that I was going to be working for older adults. And I noticed now that this is very inspirational and rewarding, especially when you see how much joyful you can bring to people, especially to prevent isolation, to prevent anxiety, to engage them with the community, because sometimes they feel that they cannot be participating on these events and things like that. But now when we hear about these things through our agencies like St. Barnabas, they see, oh, wow, there's an opportunity for me to engage. So this is a very good, so that's the way that I get inspired by this. And I'm gonna keep moving like that. And this is a great team that we have. Thank you.
Definitely echoing Miguel's sentiments that the smiles definitely keep me moving forward. I got into planning, having grown up in a neighborhood that was under-resourced and infrastructurally lacking in a variety of capacities, and under the presumption that everyone else just lived in these conditions, right? And then recognizing how large Los Angeles is and how, currently being at UCLA and Westwood, everyone's lived reality is not always the same, but bringing it back to the young people and really the ways in which they view their world and their lived experiences. They might not necessarily always have the formal language, but are actively viewing their world as planners, as advocates, as agents of change, and are really invested in mentorship. So again, I got a lot from mentorship, and I'm now in the position to be able to connect the kids to people in career professions, mostly in the built environment that, again, like know that these are career paths for them to be able to transform spaces that in some way or another can either be welcoming or disinviting, but also, again, encouraging the young people to think about how, participating in a survey might be trivial, but again, like these are individuals that are making decisions, organizations that are making decisions that actively want and are seeking your input, because children, teens, preteens, young adults, all of them, again, see things that I don't always see, right? And then again, the ways in which you build something doesn't always guarantee the way in which it'll be used. So really thinking about the ways in which creativity, play, and young people are able to imagine a world outside of what we're physically seeing is a lot of what inspires me to continue doing the work that we're doing.
I think seeing children and everyone enjoy a park definitely keeps me inspired. But I think probably one of the things that really inspires me are the deep conversations that people have while we are in the planning process, and people they feel very passionate about it, their ideas, the way they engage with each other and really think about the park and how they could use it and what they want to see is always really just amazing.
For me, now I'm 20 years plus into this career of mine. And, when I came to Los Angeles in 2001, it was with the passage of what was then the largest park bond measure at its time, the Proposition 12, which was $2.1 billion for park funding. And a good portion of that was directed towards urban communities. And prior to that, the lion's share of resources was going to Northern California, and Southern California, Los Angeles in particular, wasn't getting its fair share of state resources. Equity meant how much value you had in your house. I mean, people were talking about equity. And so I've seen such a tremendous amount of progress in terms of working with the community. I can say this as a lifelong bureaucrat that change rarely comes from within government. It really comes from pressure from the outside. It's the grassroots organizations that I've worked with and engaged with that really made my job and my work meaningful. And so I've seen just such a tremendous amount of progress in terms of the investment intention now into park poor communities that there isn't a park bond measure that doesn't come out that doesn't mention equity or social justice. And that's not just because government got woke all of a sudden and started doing the right thing. It's the result of wide-ranging grassroots organizations throughout Los Angeles that through this a robust community engagement process, as Anastasia mentioned, having people with a seat at the table in the decision-making process, they became empowered and they've gained a mastery over the issues of concern in their communities. And they're now empowered, as I mentioned, to take the right action to bring about social change. I'm also very encouraged by the new wave of youth leadership that I'm seeing coming up through the ranks. Diverse representation, particularly around issues of climate justice, climate change. We screwed up, our generation screwed up the planet. This is the generation that has to inherit the future. So I'm always encouraged and uplifted by conversations with people younger than myself. So there's so much work to do. I wake up every morning just so thankful that I do this kind of work and I get to work with the people that I do get to work with. They inspire me every day.
And I guess I would echo what everybody said because I fully agree with everyone, but I would say I'm definitely inspired by having people whose voices have often been marginalized either because of their age or because of their race or immigration status or sexual orientation, be able to express their voices and see what they want materialize in the form of parks. I say often that too often park planners, academics, we're talking about the average user and planning and designing for an average user. There is no such person. And basically, this was meant for the white male user. And that's what we have been planning for, and we see a difference happening. I'm also inspired to see, all these different parties coming together, not only the public sector, but also the nonprofits, community-based groups, foundations, universities, and coming together to work to implement things that real communities and real people would like to see and have a say in the process. So, that's what inspires me.
Well, as we're wrapping up, I want to thank you all of our speakers, all of our participants. It's a great way to end. Hopefully, getting a lot of chats about how everyone was so inspired with this. So I want to thank you and invite my staff to share our final slides in case you want to stay involved. Let's see if we can go ahead and do that.
And you should all come to the event. We don't know the date yet, but we'll let you know at the Golden Age Park.